The fine work of the Assassination Records Review Board has given us nearly 6 million pages of new documents. A lot of the material is new, and it includes significant evidence from CIA records, evidence withheld from the Warren Commission. While the evidence in these records is insufficient to determine who the ultimate perpetrators of the crime were, it is sufficient to establish that Oswald's Cuban escapades were part of the plot. The documents make it clear that many CIA officers became enmeshed in these escapades, both in New Orleans and Mexico City, and at headquarters after the president's murder, covering it up. We know of at least a dozen such officers at the CIA. Due to time constraints, Jeff and I will identify several of them, but only talk about 3 in more detail. We believe 2 of these CIA officers were unwitting participants, and the 3rd was an unindicted co-conspirator in the conspiracy to kill JFK. It was their job to know about Oswald and to take action concerning him with respect to the incoming reports on his Cuban capers before Kennedy was killed. While unwitting in the plot, their collective responses played a significant role in the intelligence failure that culminated in the president's murder. In a nutshell, a CIA officer that Jeff will discuss shortly manipulated Oswald in a manner to establish the story that Oswald was an agent of Castro, while still others at CIA headquarters that I will discuss took actions that suppressed that story from the Mexico City station. They did this at the very moment Oswald went to Mexico City to put his Cuban story in play, in a failed attempt to obtain a visa to go there, to Cuba. You may draw me out further on this in the Q&A, but I'm going to move along. What the station learned about Oswald's Cuban contacts in Mexico City, they reported to headquarters. Those reports and the taped phone conversations of a conspirator who impersonated Oswald to further link him to Castro and the Kremlin were destroyed and covered up by CIA headquarters after the president's murder. While these reports and tapes were thus destroyed, the story itself was not. President Johnson used it to force Earl Warren and others to take part in a national security cover-up. I will deal with that part shortly. But first, let's take a closer look at some of the CIA officers who handled the Oswald Cuban Student Director DRE story before the assassination.
For the purposes of this discussion here, I'm going to start on August 1st, 1963. On that day, a man named George Joannides was promoted to become the chief of the psychological warfare staff in the JM Wave station of the CIA in Miami. George Joannides at that time was 40 years old. He was a 10-year veteran of the clandestine service. He reported directly to Deputy Director Richard Helms. Five days after, chief among his duties in Miami was handling of the CIA contacts with one of the most prominent and effective anti-Castro exile organizations, the Directorio Revolucionario Estudiantil, Student Revolutionary Directorate, also known in the American press as the Cuban Student Directorate, and sometimes by its initials, DRE. In CIA files that Joannides generated on the group was known by the code name AMSPEL. This is Joannides' fitness report. You can see that it was written on July 31st, 1963, the day before he took over. And you can see in the bottom line, he's the case officer for a student project involving, and these are important terms, political action, propaganda, and intelligence gathering. Those are important because 5 days later, Lee Harvey Oswald wanders into the New Orleans chapter of the DRE and announces that he wants to help them in their fight against Castro. This is Oswald, the alleged leftist. The DRE rebuffs his advance and begins to engage in intelligence collection on Oswald. They send people out to find out who he is. Political action. They accost him handing out leaflets on the corner. They challenge him to a debate on the radio. They tape the debate on the radio. And then propaganda. They put out a press release denouncing Oswald and calling for a federal investigation of his activities. This is 3 months before he is assassinated before he allegedly assassinated President Kennedy. At the time, Joannides was supplying the group with up to $25,000 a month That's probably about $150,000 a month in today's money. And the DRE, his assets, the AMSPEL assets, proceed to do the intelligence collection, keep tabs on Oswald, and make a big deal of his pro-Castro connections. These incidents draw the attention, the street fight between the DRE members and Oswald draws the attention of the FBI, and the incident is taken seriously by federal authorities. We don't know Joe Anides' response to that. The records of his activities in August 1963 are missing from the CIA files, but we do know that the report on Oswald and the DRE was forwarded to Washington. And now John will pick up the story here.
In a second, yeah.
No.
Just turn it off. Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Can't we just turn that off? Oh, no.
You don't need to see your head report, but...
There we go. All right. That FBI report on Oswald and the DRE, as well as another one earlier on his FPCC activities in Dallas before he went to New Orleans, were sent to CIA headquarters in Washington. And the one on Oswald and the DRE landed on the desk of Jane Roman on October the 4th. Jane was a liaison officer working in James Angleton's counterintelligence staff. The Oswald DRE story then went to 2 officers working at the counterintelligence section of the agency's Cuban affairs staff, the SAS. Might as well put that up now, Rex. And it stayed there for 3 important days, the 8th, 9th, and 10th of October. During those 3 days, it was during those 3 days that CIA headquarters and its Mexico City station exchanged cables on Oswald and his escapades in Mexico. Talking about right here. This is the 8th, 9th, and 10th. And both of these individuals work in the counterintelligence section of the Special Affairs Staff. That's where the Oswald DRE story was sitting in the CIA at the time that the station and headquarters exchanged information on Oswald. Now, in the Mexico City station, that's a cover sheet, by the way. You're looking at a cover sheet to that DRE report. The report, the FBI report that we're talking about, this is the routing sheet that people sign for when they read the documents, and this one in particular was that FBI report. When the Mexico City station, after discovering Oswald's activities there, asked headquarters who he was, the headquarters response was authored by John Whitten, alias John Celso. Here's his signature right here on the bottom of the cable that was sent from headquarters. He was the agency's chief of covert operations for Mexico and Central America. Now, Jane Roman participated in the coordination of the headquarters response. As you can see, here's her signature on both of these documents here. A response which concealed from the Mexico station Oswald's activities with the DRE and the Free Play for Cuba Committee. Inasmuch as it says, and this is just the last paragraph, our latest information is a State Department report dated May 62. Well, of course, it isn't, because they've got all these reports that they're reading. The very people who are writing and coordinating on this, you can find, there's Jane Roman, there's her signature up there. So, in essence, headquarters is suppressing the story, not informing